Hello everyone! Welcome to English Story. Today we're bringing you an exciting new tale that's perfect for improving your English. Listen carefully to understand the story, learn new vocabulary, and boost your English listening skills. So, get ready for an amazing story, and let's start learning English together. Renting the old Queen house for the summer felt like stepping into a different world. Nestled in the countryside, it was everything I'd hoped for. A perfect escape from the chaos of city life. The house had charm, with its ivy-covered walls, creaky wooden floors, and the scent of blooming flowers drifting through the open windows. The days passed in a peaceful rhythm, each one filled with long walks through the surrounding fields, quiet evenings with a good book, and the simple pleasure of solitude. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing, something hidden just beneath the surface of this idyllic retreat. It wasn't long before I discovered it. I first noticed the door in the basement a few days after I moved in. I had been storing some of my things down there, organizing boxes in the dim light cast by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The basement was unfinished, with concrete walls and a damp, musty smell that clung to the air. It was the kind of place that felt like it held its secrets, and it wasn't long before I found one. The door was small, almost hidden in the shadows at the far end of the basement. It was made of heavy wood with an old-fashioned brass handle that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Curious, I reached out to open it, but the handle wouldn't turn. It was locked. When I asked the landlord about it the next day, he was curt. "That room is off limits," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It's not part of the rental agreement. Just leave it alone." His response only fueled my curiosity. What could possibly be in that room? I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I went down to the basement, my eyes would drift toward the door, my mind spinning with possibilities. What was he hiding? One evening while cleaning up after dinner, I found the key. It was tucked away in the back of a kitchen drawer, almost as if someone had hidden it there. The moment I saw it, I knew what it was for. The temptation was too strong to resist. My heart raced as I took the key down to the basement, the old stairs creaking underfoot. I hesitated in front of the door, the key cold in my hand. Part of me knew I should leave it alone, respect the landlord's wishes. But my curiosity won out in the end. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a room that was unlike anything else in the house. It was pristine, a stark contrast to the rest of the dusty basement. The air was cool and still, as if the room had been sealed off from the world for years. Everything was meticulously arranged. A small table with a chair, shelves lined with old books and trinkets, and a large cabinet against the far wall. But what caught my attention were photographs. They were everywhere, covering the walls, the shelves, even the floor. Hundreds of them, all in black and white, neatly framed and arranged in rows. And they were all of me. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the images. They were taken from various angles. Me walking in the garden, sitting on the porch, reading in the living room. Some were recent. Others looked like they'd been taken the moment I arrived. The more I looked, the more unsettled I became. Who had taken these? How had I not known someone was watching me? My breath quickened as I realized that some of the photos were from inside the house. There were pictures of me cooking in the kitchen, lounging in the living room, even sitting at the desk in the study. The angles were strange, almost voyeuristic, as if the photographer had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to capture me. I couldn't bear it any longer. I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I locked it and hurried back upstairs, the key heavy in my pocket. I shoved it back into the drawer where I had found it, as if returning it to its hiding place could somehow erase what I had seen. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. I kept expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway, the sound of someone sneaking through the house. But the night passed in silence, the house as still as ever. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a mistake, a misunderstanding. Perhaps the photos had been left by a previous tenant, someone who had an unusual hobby. Maybe the landlord didn't even know about them. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. When I finally worked up the courage to return to the basement, the door to the locked room was just as I had left it. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the key, debating whether or not to go back inside. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, to pretend I had never found it. But I had to know. I opened the door, and my breath caught in my throat. The room was exactly the same, except for one horrifying detail. The photographs had been replaced. The new ones were in color, the images sharp and clear, and they were all of me, asleep in my bed. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at the photos, each one taken from a different angle, as if someone had been standing right next to me while I slept. The sheets were the same, the position of my body identical to how I remembered lying the night before. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Someone had been in my room while I slept. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the threshold as I fled the room. The key slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor, but I didn't care. I bolted up the stairs, my mind racing with fear. I had to get out of there. Within the hour, I had packed my things and was in my car, speeding away from the house as fast as I could. I didn't tell the landlord why I was leaving early, didn't even bother to ask for a refund. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there another night. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the window, watching me leave. But the house remained still and silent, its secrets hidden behind its quiet exterior. I never found out who took those photos or why they were there, but the memory of that room and the feeling of being watched stayed with me long after I left. I learned a valuable lesson that summer. Some doors are better left locked. Story number 2. The first time the house alarm went off in the middle of the night, I dismissed it as a glitch. I had just moved into the old house a few weeks ago, and though the previous owner assured me that everything was in working order, I figured the alarm system was just showing its age. Groggy and half asleep, I shuffled downstairs to disarm the alarm, my heart pounding in my chest from the sudden jolt. I checked every window and door, making sure they were all locked and secure. Everything seemed fine, so I chalked it up to a technical error and went back to bed. But it didn't stop there. The alarm continued to go off night after night, always at the same time, 2:47 a.m. Every time it happened, I would get up, go through the house, and find nothing out of place. I even called the alarm company, and they sent a technician to inspect the system. He found no issues, no signs of tampering or malfunction. Yet the alarm persisted, as if it had a mind of its own. One night, about a week after the alarm first started acting up, I found myself in the basement, organizing some more boxes left behind by the previous owner. I lost track of time, sorting through dusty memorabilia. when I heard the sound of someone moving around upstairs, the soft creak of floorboards, the faint shuffle of footsteps. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, listening intently. The footsteps were deliberate, not like the random settling of an old house, but the measured tread of someone walking through the rooms. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that there was someone in my house. She told me to stay on the line and remain quiet until the police arrived. I could still hear the footsteps overhead, moving from the kitchen to the living room, then toward the staircase. My mind raced as I crouched behind a stack of boxes, praying that whoever was upstairs wouldn't come down to the basement. The minutes dragged on like hours, the tension and fear so thick it was almost suffocating. Finally, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside, followed by the slamming of doors. The police were here. Relief washed over me. But the footsteps continued, undisturbed by the arrival of the authorities. I stayed hidden until I heard the officers calling out, announcing their presence. Only then did I emerge from the basement, my hands trembling as I climbed the stairs to meet them. The officers searched the entire house, room by room, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been inside. They checked the windows and doors, just as I had, and everything was secure. They even reviewed the security footage from the cameras I had installed around the house. But the footage showed nothing. No one entering or leaving. No shadowy figures creeping through the halls. It was as if the sounds I had heard were all in my head, but I knew they weren't. I had heard those footsteps, felt the presence of someone or something moving through my home. The officers tried to reassure me, suggesting that perhaps it was just the house settling, or maybe an animal outside that I had mistaken for an intruder. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. They thought I was overreacting, that maybe I was just spooked from living alone in an unfamiliar place. After the police left, I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself that maybe they were right. Maybe I was just hearing things. But deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong with the house, something I couldn't explain. The alarm kept going off, always at 2:47 a.m., and every time it did, I felt that same cold dread wash over me. A few nights later, I decided to stay up and watch the security footage in real time, determined to catch whatever was triggering the alarm. I sat in front of the monitor, the house dark and silent around me, the only light coming from the screen. 2:47 a.m. came and went. For a moment, I thought maybe the disturbances had stopped. But then the alarm blared, shattering the silence. I quickly rewound the footage, my eyes scanning the screen for any sign of movement. There was nothing. No intruder, no animal, nothing that could have set off the alarm. But as I listened closely, I heard something that sent a chill down my spine. Faint, almost imperceptible, there were footsteps, muffled, distant, but unmistakably human. They were there on the recording, yet when I played it back for anyone else, they heard nothing. It was as if these sounds were meant for me alone. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I became obsessed with the alarm and the footsteps, spending hours watching the footage, trying to catch even the smallest anomaly. But no matter how many times I watched, the result was always the same. Nothing visible. Only those faint, ghostly footsteps echoing through the house. I started to avoid going to bed, dreading the moment when the alarm would go off again. I'd lie awake, listening, waiting for the footsteps to start. Sometimes I thought I could hear whispers, just on the edge of hearing, as if someone were trying to speak to me from the other side of the walls. But the words were always just out of reach, leaving me with nothing but a growing sense of unease. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left the house, staying with a friend while I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't live like that, constantly on edge, feeling like I was being watched, haunted by something I couldn't see. I called in another technician, another round of police, but nothing helped. The alarm continued to malfunction. The footsteps continued to echo in the recordings, and I knew that whatever was in the house, it wasn't going to leave me alone. The final night I spent in that house, the alarm went off at 2:47 a.m., as usual. But this time, when I listened to the recording, the footsteps were louder, clearer, as if they were right beside me. And this time, I heard something else too, a low, guttural whisper, just one word, but it was enough to send me fleeing into the night. Leave. Story number 3, the AT work. Everything was routine. I'd been with the company for a few years, settling into the predictable rhythm of my daily tasks. My desk, nestled in a quiet corner of the office, had become a second home, with photos of family and a few plants to liven up the space. I'd never had any reason to feel uneasy there, until the notes started appearing. It was a Monday morning when I found the first one. I arrived at my desk, set my coffee down, and opened my drawer to grab a pen. Inside was a small, folded piece of paper. My name was scrawled on the front in neat handwriting. At first, I thought it was a harmless joke, maybe a leftover from a team-building exercise I'd forgotten about. But as I unfolded the note, a chill ran down my spine. The message inside was brief, but unsettling. I know what you did last summer. My mind raced. What could this mean? I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary the previous summer. No secrets, no scandals, just a normal vacation with friends. I laughed it off, chalking it up to a prank by a coworker with a strange sense of humor. I crumpled up the note and tossed it in the trash, determined to forget about it. But the notes kept coming. Every few days, I'd find a new one waiting for me. They appeared in my desk drawer, slipped between papers, or even tucked under my keyboard. Each note was more personal, containing details that no one else should know. My childhood fears, my anxieties, even things I had never spoken aloud to anyone. The handwriting was always the same, perfectly neat, with a slight slant that was unfamiliar to me. The messages, however, were anything but neat. They hinted at my insecurities, my deepest fears, and always ended with a vague but unsettling statement like, "I'm closer than you think," or "You can't hide from me." By the third note, I started to grow paranoid. I began looking around the office, trying to catch a glimpse of someone watching me or sneaking away from my desk. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Everyone went about their business as usual, oblivious to the turmoil churning inside me. I confided in a close friend at work, Sarah, hoping she might have some insight. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concern. "Are you sure it's not just someone playing a prank on you?" she asked, trying to reassure me. But the look in her eyes told me she was just as unnerved as I was. "Maybe you should talk to HR," she suggested. So I did. I went to HR, feeling a bit foolish, but needing to do something to regain control over the situation. The HR manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Dempsey, listened to my concerns with a stony expression. She assured me that they would look into it and asked if I had any idea who might be responsible. But I didn't. I had no enemies at work, no one who would go to such lengths to unnerve me. Days passed after my meeting with HR, and I heard nothing. No updates, no explanations. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Every time I opened my desk drawer, my heart would race, expecting another note. But for a while, there were none. Just as I started to convince myself that it was over, that maybe HR had quietly dealt with the issue. The notes returned. This time, they were worse. The messages were no longer just cryptic. They were disturbing. One note simply read, "I know you're scared," and another, "You're not safe here." The last straw came on Friday afternoon. It had been a long week, and I was exhausted. As I sat at my desk, trying to focus on finishing a report, I opened my drawer to grab a file and found another note. My breath caught in my throat as I read it. "I'm watching you right now." The words sent a jolt of fear through me. I felt a sudden, intense pressure on my chest, like a weight pressing down. My hands trembled as I clutched the note, my mind racing. The room felt suffocating, and the air was thick with tension. I felt a gaze on me, heavy and invasive. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned around, expecting to find someone standing there, staring at me. But the office was empty. The cubicles were deserted. The usual hum of conversations and ringing phones replaced by an eerie silence. It was late in the afternoon, and most of my colleagues had already left for the weekend. The lights overhead flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the room. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked around my desk, scanning every corner of the office. I checked behind partitions, peered into empty conference rooms, and even looked out the windows, but there was no one. The feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at me, but I couldn't find a single soul. My rational mind told me it was just my imagination, fueled by the paranoia the notes had stirred up. But a deeper, more primal part of me knew better. Unable to shake the fear, I gathered my things and left the office in a hurry. I didn't look back, afraid of what I might see or what I might not see if I did. That weekend, I barely slept, haunted by the thought that someone out there knew me, knew my fears, and was toying with me. When Monday came, I dreaded returning to work. When I arrived, my desk was just as I had left it. I hesitated before opening the drawer, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no new note, no sign that anything had been disturbed. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of relief, until I noticed something else. The note from Friday was gone, the one that had said, "I'm watching you right now." I had left it in the drawer, but now it was missing. Someone had taken it. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Whoever was doing this was closer than I ever imagined. I went back to HR, demanding answers. Mrs. Dempsey seemed more annoyed than concerned. "We've checked the security footage," she said curtly. "No one has been tampering with your desk. Are you sure you didn't misplace that note yourself?" Her words stung, and I left the office feeling more alone than ever. The notes had stopped, but the fear remained. I could no longer concentrate at work, always feeling on edge, always looking over my shoulder. I never found out who was behind the notes or how they knew such intimate details about my life. But the experience left a scar, a lingering sense of unease that I could never quite shake. Even now, I sometimes catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me from the shadows. Story number 4. It had been an ordinary night out with friends. Dinner at our favorite restaurant, followed by drinks at a local bar. The laughter, the stories, the easy camaraderie, all of it had made the evening one of those perfect nights that left you smiling long after it was over. But that happiness shattered the moment I reached for my wallet the next morning and found it missing. At first, I thought I had simply misplaced it. I retraced my steps, searching through my apartment, checking every pocket, every corner, every possible place it could have fallen. I even called the restaurant and the bar, hoping that someone had found it and turned it in, but it was nowhere to be found. As the day wore on, the sinking realization that my wallet was gone for good settled in. I had no choice but to report it stolen. I canceled my credit cards, filed a police report, and began the tedious process of replacing my ID and other important documents. The inconvenience was bad enough, but what truly bothered me was the thought of someone out there having access to my personal information, someone who could be using it for who knows what purpose. A few days later, as I was heading out for work, I noticed an envelope slipped under my front door. It was unmarked, no return address, just a plain white envelope with my name scrawled across the front in messy handwriting. Puzzled, I picked it up and opened it. Inside was my wallet. For a moment, relief washed over me, until I opened it and saw that it had been emptied of all its contents. My credit cards, ID, cash, everything was gone, except for a single slip of paper tucked into one of the card slots. I pulled it out, and my heart skipped a beat as I read the message written on it in large, bold letters. "I know where you live." A cold shiver ran down my spine, and my hands shook as I held the note. The words were simple, but filled with a menacing certainty that made my blood run cold. Someone had gone through the trouble of stealing my wallet, removing all its contents, and then returning it to me with this chilling message. Whoever it was, they knew where I lived. They had been to my home, close enough to slip the envelope under my door without me noticing. Fear gripped me as I stared at the note, my mind racing with questions. Who had done this? Why would they return the wallet? What did they want? But no matter how hard I tried to piece it together, I couldn't make sense of it. All I knew was that I was no longer safe in my own home. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, made my heart pound. I barely slept, jumping at every little sound, convinced that someone was trying to break in. I decided to take action. The first thing I did was change the locks on my door. The idea that someone might have a key to my apartment filled me with dread, so I had a locksmith come out immediately. I watched as he installed the new locks, double-checking to make sure everything was secure. But even that didn't fully ease my fears. Next, I moved some of my belongings to a friend's place. I didn't have the time or resources to relocate entirely, but I thought if I could make it look like I wasn't staying there full-time, it might deter whoever was watching me. I packed up some clothes, important documents, and anything of value, and spent a few nights crashing on my friend's couch. But the fear followed me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was away from home. I also installed a security system with cameras, motion detectors, and alarms. The company assured me that my apartment was now one of the safest in the city, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time I entered my apartment, I checked the footage from the cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever had left that note. But nothing ever showed up. It was as if the person had simply vanished, leaving me in a state of perpetual dread. The days turned into weeks, and gradually the intensity of my fear began to subside. The fear never completely disappeared. I started to regain some sense of normalcy, though I remained hypervigilant. I avoided going out late at night, kept my curtains drawn, and checked the locks multiple times before going to bed. But the memory of that note haunted me, a constant reminder that someone out there had invaded my life in the most personal way possible. I became obsessed with trying to figure out who had done it. I went over every detail of that night out with friends, trying to remember if anyone had been acting strangely or if I had seen anyone following me. But nothing stood out. I even considered the possibility that it was some kind of sick joke, but the note didn't feel like a prank. It felt like a threat, one that I couldn't ignore. Months passed, and while the fear no longer consumed me, it had left its mark. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, and less trusting of others. The feeling of being watched never completely left me, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow. I knew I had to move on. A part of me would always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if that anonymous threat would ever come to pass. In the end, I never found out who took my wallet or why they returned it with that ominous note. The mystery remains unsolved, a lingering question with no answer. But the experience changed me. It made me realize how vulnerable we can be, how easily our sense of security can be shattered by a single anonymous act. And it taught me to be more careful, to never take my safety for granted. Because once you've been marked, the fear of what might happen next never truly goes away. Story number 5. The first text came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, finishing up some emails when my phone buzzed. I saw a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another spam message, but something made me pause. I opened it, expecting usual nonsense, but what I read made my skin crawl. "Nice blue shirt today. You look good in that color." I frowned, looking down at my blue shirt. It wasn't an unusual outfit choice, and it could have been a coincidence, but something about the message felt off. How did this person know what I was wearing? I looked around the office, trying to spot anyone acting suspicious, but everyone was engrossed in their work. I dismissed it as a weird prank and went back to my tasks. But the messages didn't stop. Over the next few days, more texts came in, each one more unsettling than the last. They detailed my routines, places I'd been, and even conversations I'd had. One morning, I received a text that read, "Did you enjoy your coffee at the corner cafe? The barista gave you an extra shot, didn't she?" I had indeed stopped at the cafe that morning, and the barista too had given me an extra shot of espresso. My heart raced as I reread the message. How did they know that? I hadn't told anyone. At first, I tried to brush it off as a prank. Maybe a friend was playing a joke on me, or perhaps it was someone in the office who'd seen me at the cafe. But as the days passed, the messages grew more specific, more personal. They started predicting things that would happen to me. Minor accidents, small misfortunes that, while not life-threatening, were certainly unsettling. One day, as I was leaving for work, I received a text. "Be careful on your way out. You might trip on the last step." I paused at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. The last step of the staircase had always been a bit tricky, but I'd never tripped on it before. I shook my head, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as I descended the stairs, I hesitated on the last step, and in my hesitation, I lost my balance. I stumbled, catching myself on the banister just in time. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the bottom, the words of the text echoing in my mind. I decided to take action. I tried tracing the number, but every attempt led to a dead end. It was as if the number didn't exist, a ghost in the system. I reported the texts to the police, but without any real threat, they couldn't do much. They suggested I change my number, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted to know who was behind this. The idea that someone was watching me, knowing so much about my life, was terrifying, but I also needed answers. The texts continued, each one a reminder that someone was out there observing me. You're running late today. Maybe skip the coffee and catch the earlier train. The texts predicted delays, weather changes, and even the arrival of a package I hadn't been expecting. I started feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. How could someone know so much? How could they predict these things with such accuracy? I began to withdraw, avoiding my usual routines, hoping to throw off whoever was watching me. I changed my commute, stopped going to my favorite spots, even started taking different routes home. But the texts followed me, commenting on my new routines, almost as if they were taunting me for trying to escape. Nice try with the detour, but I still see you. Sleep became elusive. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, and I'd dread what I might read. The constant anxiety wore me down, and I found myself jumping at shadows, seeing threats where there were none. I even considered leaving town for a while, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was sending the texts would still find me no matter where I went. Then, just as abruptly as they had started, the text stopped. I noticed it one day when I realized that I hadn't received a message in over 24 hours. At first, I felt a sense of relief, thinking that maybe finally it was over. But the relief was short-lived, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. Why had they stopped? Had they moved on to someone else? Or was this part of some larger plan? The days turned into weeks, and still there were no more texts. I began to relax, though the memory of those weeks of torment lingered. The silence, however, was almost worse than the texts themselves. I found myself constantly on edge, waiting for the next message, the next sign that someone was still watching. But nothing came. As the weeks passed, I tried to return to my normal life, but the knowledge that someone had known so much about me, had predicted so many of my movements, weighed heavily on me. I became more cautious, more guarded, not just with my routines, but with the people around me. The experience had shaken me to my core, leaving a scar that time would never fully heal. One night, months later, I was sitting alone in my apartment, the memory of the texts a distant yet ever-present shadow in my mind. My phone buzzed on the table, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I stared at the screen, the familiar anxiety flooding back in an instant. But when I picked it up, it was just a notification from a friend. Nothing more. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. But as I set the phone down, a single thought lingered, chilling me to the bone. Somewhere out there, someone still knew too much about me. Thank you for listening the story on English Story. We hope you found this thrilling tale helpful for your English learning journey. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more exciting stories, and leave a comment telling us what you thought. Keep practicing your English, and we'll see you in the next episode.